What's up, guys? Hope you're having a good day. I know you're all here for the UFC 293 breakdown videos, but before we get into those, we need to talk a little bit about Mr. Benoit Saint-Denis, who looked absolutely amazing last weekend at UFC Paris. Now, if you watched last week's breakdown video, when I broke down the fight between Moises and Saint-Denis, I said that I was extremely tempted to bet Saint-Denis, but I hadn't made my mind up yet. And I actually asked you guys to leave a comment and let me know what you thought. Some of you said, go ahead, bet Saint-Denis. The majority of people actually said you're better off passing. And then there are even some people that said they were betting on Thiago Moises. So after, putting a lot of thought into this fight, I'd pretty much decided that I was going to pass on this matchup. But then I watched the ceremonial weigh-ins, and after seeing the weigh-ins, I just had to bet Benoit Saint-Denis. So if you're in my Discord group, if you're a member of my community, you'll know that I dropped a bet on Saint-Denis, as well as a couple of other bets. We went 2-1, little bit unlucky not to clean sweep actually, because I thought that the Edwards decision probably should have gone to Jocelyn Edwards. But anyway, we almost went 3-0 on the night. We ended up going 2-1. It is what it is. But yeah, ended up betting on Saint-Denis, dropped the bet in the Discord. So I just wanted to give you an update on, what I ended up doing with Saint-Denis, because obviously it was a big part of last week's breakdown video. But the reason why I ended up betting Saint-Denis, like I said, I'd made my mind up that I was passing. It was actually the ceremonial weigh-ins. So if we take a look at the weigh-ins, look at the size difference between these two. So you can see both are wearing the same footwear, but Saint-Denis is just by far the bigger man. Not only is he taller, when the camera zooms in, you'll see that he's bigger in the upper body, bigger muscular skeletal system, bigger head, bigger shoulders, bigger neck. You can see here as it zooms in. Benoit Saint-Denis, just by far the bigger, more physically imposing human. And we know size, physicality, it matters in MMA, right? It's why we've got weight classes. Talking about physicality, Fioro was obviously way too physically imposing for Rose to handle in that fight. And so once I saw the size difference between these two, I went out and bet Saint-Denis, because all of the things that we spoke about in the breakdown video that Moises could do to potentially cause Saint-Denis a problem in terms of making Saint-Denis pay for his bad striking defense, or Moises using his high-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu ground game to cause Saint-Denis problems on the ground. Those two things that Moises may have been able to have done to cause Saint-Denis a problem were far less likely with that size difference. And we saw it in the fight. Even though Moises landed clean, hard, powerful shots on Saint-Denis, couldn't really hurt him too much on the feet, because Saint-Denis was just big, strong, and he could walk through everything that the smaller fighter was throwing at him. And then on the ground, even though Moises is a high-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, he just got overwhelmed and overpowered on the ground, with Saint-Denis being a bigger, stronger, more physically imposing man. So I just wanted to give you guys an update on that. I did end up pulling the trigger on Mr. Saint-Denis, and all the homies in the Discord group were able to get that bet from me on Friday night. And don't forget, if you want to join the Discord group and gain access to breakdown videos for every single fight on every single UFC card, including the prelims, just need to become a member of my community, MMABettingTips.com. Link for that in the description below. You'll also get access to all my pre-fight bets as well. Now, before we get into the breakdown videos for UFC 293, you guys know that I talk about live betting on the UFC a lot. It is my speciality, it's my bread and butter, and I'm very good at it. I've been live betting on the UFC for 14 years. I've got a lot of experience, and we make a profit pretty much every month on the UFC, or most months I should say. If you look at our profitability chart, we have far more winning months than we have losing months. And someone that's been a member of my live betting group for years actually went and looked at our results dating back to 2021 and found that we actually make a profit on 75% of UFC fight night cards, which is kind of incredible. So if you're someone that watches every UFC event live, my live betting group could be great for you, because you get to watch the fights and enjoy the fights, enjoy the sport we all love, but also a pretty good chance that you're going to be making money on most of the events that you watch. So it's something that I think pretty much everyone watching this video would enjoy and get a lot of value out of. But I'm also very conscious I've never actually shown you guys what I do. So what I'm going to do is play footage of a bet I've placed very recently, accompanied by footage of the fight and the Discord chat from my live betting group. So you can kind of see, everything that you get as part of my live betting service. So I'm going to play that video for you shortly before we get into the breakdowns. And if you like what you see, you can sign up to join my live bets for this weekend. And if you want to do that, just come to my website, mmabettingtips.com, link in the description below. You scroll down, go to where it says in-play membership, click learn more. You can find out how to sign up. If you've got any questions about what I do or the content of this video, if you want more information, leave a comment below and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. But yeah, check out the video. I'll play it now, and then after that we'll get into breaking down these fights for UFC 293.
So just like the last fight, this matchup has got the potential to be super competitive. Both guys tough as nails, both are absolute dogs. Cardio isn't going to come into this one. Both these guys can fight at a high pace for 3 rounds, absolutely no problem. If the fight stays standing, then Kurt Holloway's got a huge advantage. He's going to light Austin Hubbard up on the feet, win pretty comfortably. On top of that, Holloway is tough as nails. He's got a great chin, and Hubbard doesn't really have any power in his hands, so it's not like he's going to be able to land anything on the feet that could hurt that could hurt Holloway. So Holloway, massive advantage when it comes to striking here, and if he can keep the fight standing, he's going to cruise to a win. Unfortunately, Holloway has one massive deal-breaking weakness in his overall skill set, similar to Gerald Meerschaert, in that his takedown defense is extremely bad. And Holloway's one of these frustrating guys that if you take him down, he spends far too long hunting for long shot submissions off his back rather than trying to work his way back up to his feet. Now, he does have a very active guard. He is very scrambly, but he still accepts being on the bottom way too much. And 9 times out of 10, we know being on the bottom is a losing position in MMA. Now, Hubbard's not the best offensive wrestler. Doesn't even, shoot that many takedowns, to be honest with you. And he doesn't have the best grappling control. But this is the biggest fight of his life, the Ultimate Fighter finale, and it would be very foolish to try and win a kickboxing match here tonight against Holloway because of how big Holloway's advantages on the feet are. So if Hubbard comes into this fight with a grappling heavy game plan, if Holloway doesn't show more urgency to get back up to his feet than he usually does, then, he could really struggle. So from a live betting point of view, what I'm looking at here is whether Holloway shows more urgency to work his way back up to his feet than usual. Because we know that Holloway for sure has the advantage when it comes to striking. So if we see Hubbard get a takedown, and instead of accepting being on the bottom, Holloway decides to quickly work his way back up to his feet, then I can start to become more interested in live betting on Holloway. It's going to be very dangerous to bet Holloway in this fight, while we know if Hubbard just starts to commit hard to that wrestling, he's probably going to be able to get Holloway down quite easily. So that's what we're looking at here. But both guys are absolutely tough as nails, and there you can see very early on the lack of takedown defense from Holloway. Not quite as bad as Meerschaert's, but still pretty bad. And Holloway's going to be 37 years old soon, so probably not going to be improving anytime soon. But what we want to look at here is whether Holloway shows any more willingness to pop back up to his feet. And you can see the issue with Holloway here. Hubbard is posturing up. There's loads of space in there for Holloway to start working back up to his feet. But instead, he just chooses to throw hammer fists off his back and tack off his back. Very frustrating. So what's really annoying is a lot of the fights have played out how we thought they would tonight, but we haven't been able to live bet any of them yet. Katona-Gibson fight went very similar to how we said it would. So did the Meerschaert-Petrosky fight. We just haven't really been able to find a spot to get our money into. Hopefully we'll get it on this one. So can't get too carried away with Holloway working his way back up to his feet here for a couple of reasons. The first being he gave the takedown up very easily. The second being Holloway didn't really work his way back up to his feet here. Hubbard gave him loads of space from top position to get back up, and he still took an eternity to actually commit to it. So This fight's problematic because now we know if at any point in the fight Holloway starts to build momentum on the feet, you know, Hubbard's going to be able to get him back down easily. Big right hand from Holloway again. Now you can see Holloway starting to find his range. If Hubbard is smart, he will not try to be a hero here. He will just grapple. He's got good enough cardio to grapple hard to 3 rounds. There's no need to try and win a kickboxing match against a superior kickboxer. Holloway does have knockout power. Only takes 1 shot. Nice takedown defense there from Holloway. 2 minutes left to go. Good round this for Holloway. Hubbard didn't really score with the takedown, and outside of that, he's eating the cleaner, harder shots on the feet. Hubbard started well, but Holloway growing into this fight. Nice double leg entry there from Hubbard, turns the corner, gets the takedown. That's the problem with this fight, why it's a really, really tricky one for live betting. Because every time Holloway starts to build momentum on the feet, we know Hubbard has got the wrestling to get him down. It's really, really tricky. Actually looks like you might not be able to see this if you're on a low quality stream, but if you're on a nice high definition display, it actually looks like Hubbard might be bleeding out of the left ear, which is not a good thing, man. Actually looks like there's blood coming out of the ear, which is usually a pretty big red flag. That isn't a good thing. 40 seconds left to go. Holloway works his way back up to his feet. So it's one of those situations where Hubbard isn't really scoring with the takedowns. So again, similar to Mirsad Petrosky, if you've got really educated judges, Holloway's winning this round in my opinion. Because he's outstruck Hubbard by a wide margin. And Hubbard hasn't been able to do anything with the grappling. Guys, I am going to actually take a little bit of a gamble here. I am going to recommend a 1 unit bet on Kurt Holloway at odds of 3.25. That's 1 unit on Holloway at odds of 3.25. It is a gamble because we know how bad his takedown defense is. But if you've got really, really educated judges here, I think this could be a pretty difficult fight for Hubbard to win. So let me just get my own bets in here, and then I will give you my reasoning for the bet. Sorry guys, still trying to get some money down. So the reason why I like Holloway in this fight is because he's the aggressor. He's landing the cleaner, harder shots on the feet. He's doing more damage. He is getting taken down, but Hubbard isn't doing anything with the takedowns at all. You know, he isn't able to rack up much control time. Holloway is making life extremely difficult for him on the feet, and Hubbard cannot cause Holloway a problem on the feet. So unless Hubbard goes full Khabib here, starts taking Holloway down and racking up big grappling control, I think Holloway is in a really good position to win this. And betting Holloway at underdog odds for me is a no-brainer, because I scored round 1 for Holloway. I don't feel Hubbard achieved much with his grappling in round 1, so I scored round 1 for Holloway. And if he can keep this up, he's winning the second as well. Holloway in with a deep hook on the left side. I don't like this position for him because obviously his advantages are on the feet. Holloway 1 deep hook in on the left side, attacking with a rear naked choke. Doesn't have much here, to be honest with you, but obviously it's a big round for Holloway so far, and he is running the clock down. So if Holloway could win this round, he'd then be in a situation where I think he'd be up 2 rounds heading into the third. He's actually mounted Hubbard now. Could we snipe a big winner here, guys? Could we snipe a big winner here on the, you know, on a pay-per-view, right? Oh wow, armbar attempt from Holloway. Please don't lose the position. Triangle from Holloway. Very, very nice. Can we take the judges out the equation? Even if Holloway can just keep this position for the rest of the round, he should be up 2 going into the third. There's no need for him to release this triangle. 2 minutes. Oh, yes, please. There we go. Come on. Let's fucking go. That's how we do. Patience. Fucking patience. That's how we make money. That's how we make money. Patience. That's how we do. Kurt Holloway as an underdog. Are you crazy? 3.25 plus 225. That's how we roll. We do the work. We work our balls off all week. so that we can dig up absolute gifts like that. Kurt Holloway, 3.25 plus 225 at the end of round 1. When he won the first round. Sign me up. And let me tell you something else, boys. We're only just getting started. We have called tonight perfectly. The Meerschaert Petrosky fight went exactly how we said it would. The Katona Gibson fight went exactly how we said it would. And we weren't able to place bets on those fights, but we still read them perfectly. And we know when we keep reading fights perfectly, it is only a matter of time before we'll bag a winner. And we hit a beautiful underdog winner there to set us up for a very big night. So thank you very much, everyone. I love you all. And don't worry, there's still 7 or 8 fights still to come. And there's plenty more where that came from. So I'll take a quick break. I'll be back just in time for the next one.
So there you go. That is what we do on every single UFC event in the UFC live betting group. And don't forget, as you can see from the profitability chart, we make a profit most months. And dating back to 2021, we've made a profit on 75% of UFC Fight Night cards. The 75%. So if you'd like to give live betting a try, all you need to do, head on over to my website, mabettingtips.com. Link for that in the description below. Scroll down, click where it says Learn More next to In-Play Membership, and you can find out how to sign up there. If you don't like it, no worries. You can cancel your subscription. Send me a message, we'll get you refunded, no problem. Check it out though, because like I say, if you watch the UFC every single weekend, I think most people watching this video would get a lot of value out of it. And if you've got any questions at all, leave a comment below and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Now let's break down all of the main card fights taking place this weekend at UFC 293. Now last weekend on UFC Paris, we spoke a lot about home advantage and the impact that it would have on that event. And we saw it, right? A lot of the French fighters won, and we even saw a bit of a hometown decision when Cornell won a split decision over Jocelyn Edwards in a fight that I personally feel Edwards won. We know hometown advantage is a big thing, and it's likely to be a big thing this weekend as well, with many Australians competing on this card. And we know that the Australian fighters win around 65% of the time when they're betting against fighters from other countries on cards that take place in Australia. So if you're thinking of betting on any fighters this weekend that are not from Australia and they're fighting an Aussie, be very, very careful, because you know, statistically, fighters coming from different countries only win 1 in 3 times when they're facing Australian fighters in Australia. Something for you to think about. So rather than talking about the impact of home advantage on every single fight this weekend that features an Australian fighter, instead I'm just going to do a little video on it now, and then that'll apply to every single fight on this card where an Australian is competing. So there are a few reasons why home advantage is a pretty big deal in MMA, and we saw them pretty much all on last weekend's card at UFC Paris, right? We've already spoken about, in close competitive fights, if you've got a hometown fighter, rounds are most likely to be scored for the hometown fighter. And this isn't necessarily, corruption or anything like that. I think a lot of the time it's human nature, because if you've ever been to a live UFC event and you've seen how the crowd are with hometown fighters, you'll know that the crowd really has a big impact on the atmosphere and the action inside the octagon, right? If a fighter like Cornell, for example, is sending the crowd crazy anytime they land a clean hard shot or having any little bit of success, but when Edwards has that same success, there's no reaction from the crowd at all, then that can influence the judges, because it may look like, it might appear that Cornell's doing more damage, have more success than she is, landing harder, impactful shots. So the crowd can influence the judges. It's not necessarily that the judges just favouring hometown fighters. Sometimes the crowd can actually, skew the action inside the octagon, where it looks like the hometown fighters doing better than they actually are, because of the way that the crowd's reacting to the things that they're doing, especially when they do things like, land a big shot, or they get a takedown towards the end of the round, something like that, or they finish the round strong. Hometown judging, pretty big deal. But on top of that, we know that the crowd can also energize fighters, right? There were a lot of tough competitive matchups last weekend. You know, the Loughran versus Lapalus fight was very close. The Cornell Edwards fight was very, very close. And we know that, the majority of French fighters that competed on last week's card won, right? Even Cyril Gane, he looked absolutely amazing. He completely dominated Sergey Spivak. And a big part of this is because the crowd can really lift fighters and help them take their performances to the next level. If you think about personal trainers, right? Why do people hire personal trainers? They don't hire them because they need advice on their diet, because you can find out all that information online. They don't hire personal trainers, to teach them how to work out and what exercises to do, because again, you can learn about all that stuff online, right? The reason why people hire personal trainers is for accountability and motivation. Motivation is a big one. You think about it. Say you go for a 5k, 10k run by yourself, and you're on the run, you start to get tired. You're out of breath. Your lungs are hurting. You want to stop. Well, when you're running by yourself, it's easy to just stop. But when you've got a personal trainer with you, every time you want to stop, they shout at you, or they give you encouragement, they give you motivation, they give you praise, they push you to keep going. And the crowd at UFC events can have the same impact, so that when a fighter like Cornell last weekend is tired and hurt and she might want to quit, it's much harder when she's got the crowd behind her, because they can give her that energy, lift her performance to the next level. So there's lots of reasons why home advantage has a big impact. And I guess the final one is the negative impact that it can have on, visiting fighters, right? If we know that the home crowd can energize and lift the hometown fighter, then it can also, it can also make it harder for the visiting fighter to perform to their full potential. So, if they're put in a bad position, or if they're tired, if they're hurt, and the crowd are, creating an intense, intimidating atmosphere where they're getting on the back of the hometown, the visiting fighter, it's easier for that visiting fighter to kind of look for a way out or go into a defensive shell, not really push themselves to go for the win. So home advantage, very, very big deal in all sports. It's a big deal in the UFC as well. And so Australian fighters have a natural edge coming into the matchups this weekend, with Australian fighters winning around 65% of the time when they fight non-Australians in Australia. And again, a big part of that could be matchmaking, where the UFC give favourable matchups to hometown fighters. They give the hometown fans that are paying a lot of money to buy tickets to go watch the event, they might give them favourable matchups so that the fan favourites from that country can get wins, exciting finishes, things like that. But there's a lot more to it than that as well. And obviously we discussed those reasons. So home advantage applies to every single fight on this card. So now let's break down the first fight on the main card, which is going to be Anton Turkalj against Tyson Pedro. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that this is pretty much the only fight in the even money odds range on this card. And because of that, this is, in my opinion, one of the most interesting fights on the card as well. If you shop around, you can bet pretty much both guys at the same odds. If you look at the average odds available on Tyson Pedro, he's around an average of 1.91, which is minus 110 for an implied probability of 52%. And again, if you shop around, you can bet Turkalj at pretty much the same odds as well. So this is one of the most interesting fights on this card from a betting point of view, because if you can just lean 60-40 one way or the other, you can find a pretty good position to put your money, with the implied probability on both guys only being 52%. So Turkalj is 27 years old, 6'4", with a 78-inch reach, and Tyson Pedro is 31 years old, 6'3", with a 79-inch reach. So both guys roughly the same age, roughly the same size. There's nothing too notable there. Now, what's interesting about this matchup is that Tyson Pedro is probably better than Anton Turkalj in every single aspect of MMA. He is certainly a better striker, there is no doubt about that. And in the early stages of fights, Tyson Pedro is a pretty good grappler as well. What I also like about Tyson Pedro is that he's one of these fighters that's making big improvements from fight to fight. Every time we see Pedro, he gets better and better. But the problem with Pedro is that the longer the fight goes, the worse he gets. He's one of these guys that looks great in round one, but if you make him work hard, he slows down a lot as fights wear on. And one of the key ways that you can tell that Pedro's slowing down is when his volume drops. Early on, he's a lot more aggressive. As the rounds tick by, becomes significantly less aggressive. Am I slightly out of focus there? See if we can get me back. There we go. Are we out of focus? We in focus? We're in focus now. Okay. So, yeah, Pedro's one of these guys that slows down a lot. Turkalj, on the other hand, is, one of these guys, a little bit like Benoit Saint-Denis last weekend, that isn't the best defensively. He also slows down a bit as fights wear on, but he's one of these guys that is just an absolute dog and will keep pushing, will keep coming forward, will just try and turn the fight into an absolute war. And guys like Anton Turkalj tend to be kryptonite for guys like Tyson Pedro, because guys like Pedro just can't keep up with the pace that Turkalj is going to set. Pedro is a significantly better striker than Turkalj, there's no doubt about that, but Turkalj will just keep coming forward, keep pressing, keep forcing Pedro to work and engage and exchange the entire duration of the matchup. And when Pedro starts to slow a little bit in the second round, there won't be any opportunity for Pedro to take a break, catch his breath, recharge his batteries, because Turkalj is constantly going to be in his face. So early on, Pedro's going to do great on the feet, because Turkalj has sloppy striking, he's very bad defensively, and we know Pedro's very technical, very, very dangerous on the feet, he moves very well. But if Turkalj can survive early, take the fight in the second and third round, you could start to see Turkalj outwork Pedro on the feet when Pedro starts to get tired and his volume drops. Now, in terms of grappling, Pedro's also probably the better grappler out of the two. But again, Turkalj is one of these guys that just hustles hard. He keeps working, he keeps pressing. And again, if he can make it through that first round, the second and third will get very interesting, because when Pedro starts to get tired, Turkalj can close the skill gap with his work rate, his tenacity, his aggression, potentially start to take over. If we take a look at Tyson Pedro's fight against Mauricio Shogun Rua from back in 2018, I know this fight was a very long time ago, it was 5 years ago, but the same pattern that we see in the Shogun fight also played out in the Modestas-Bukauskas fight, which is his more recent fight, where he starts strong and then fades. The reason why I'm not going to show you footage of the Bukauskas fight is because it's a stand-up fight, and Turkalj is predominantly a grappler. He's going to want to get the fight to the ground. So it's more useful to show you the Shogun fight because there's actually grappling in this. And I just want to show you a little bit of footage so you can appreciate some of the issues with Pedro's skill set. So we're just going to skip through round one for the most part, because a big focus of this breakdown is on how much Pedro slows. So if we go into the second round, Pedro does pretty well in round one. Then if we go in or towards the end of round one, you can actually see Shogun hit a pretty easy takedown here towards the end of the first. You can see by the striking stats, it's a very good first round for Pedro. Outstrikes Shogun by a wide margin, does extremely well. So if we see how weak this takedown is that Pedro gives up right at the end of the round, Shogun just stays in side control to end the round in a dominant position. Then if we get into round two, what I want here is for you to pay attention to Pedro's body language, because you can see he just looks very, very tired. And you can also see that he kind of caves mentally in this fight, waves the white flag and quits in many ways, because once Shogun starts to walk him down, put a lot of pressure on him, force him to defend takedowns, you can see that he just hasn't got the energy to defend himself anymore. You can see Shogun here in on a nice body lock. Skip through so the breakdown doesn't become super long. But you can see Pedro gives up a takedown very easily here. Now once on the ground, exactly what Turkalj is going to try and do, Shogun just looks to out-hustle him. You can see Pedro falls in love with trying to hit a Kimura reversal, but Shogun just stays heavy and tight from top position, and Pedro looks very, very weak off his back. Very, very, very weak. And Pedro's not in a particularly bad position here, because he's quite close to the cage. He's in a good position to wall walk. Shogun doesn't have particularly good grappling control or a heavy top game. So, with only 8 minutes into this fight, you'd expect Pedro to be trying really hard to wall walk back up to his feet here. But as you can see, Shogun just kind of holds him down for the rest of the round, or for most of the round, until with a minute left to go, Pedro finally decides to stand back up. But he's been on the ground for about 3 minutes and then just takes a knee and goes back down. And again, Shogun gets another easy takedown here. I mean, look at how bad this takedown offense is from Pedro. And then obviously in the third round, Shogun gets a finish pretty quickly off that right hand. So I just wanted to show you that because, you know, obviously Pedro is likely to have improved a lot since 2018. But I don't think Pedro's problem in that fight was that he didn't have the grappling to compete with Shogun. I think Pedro's problem was he was too tired to use his grappling. And he also looked pretty tired against Bukauskas. So even though from a technical point of view, he's probably improved a lot since the Shogun fight, it might not matter if Turkalj starts to grapple hard. And to be fair to Turkalj, he's a very persistent grappler that is very aggressive, does fight at a high pace. So he will test the gas tank of Pedro. So this is a really, really interesting fight. And from a betting point of view, I am very tempted to bet Turkalj, just like I was very tempted to bet Benoit Saint-Denis last weekend. I ended up pulling the trigger on Benoit Saint-Denis, as you know from earlier on in the video. But with Anton Turkalj, I'm not sure if I will. My issues with Turkalj, the first issue is that Tyson Pedro's got home advantage on his side. We know home advantage is a big deal in MMA for all the reasons we've discussed earlier. And Turkalj's also very bad defensively. You know, he's one of these guys that very easy to hit on the feet. He's a sitting duck to the knockout. We know Pedro's a very dangerous striker. Turkalj also himself has pretty bad takedown defense, so Pedro could cause him big problems early in the fight. On top of that, Pedro's cardio has cost him twice in the UFC now. You know, Bukauskas and Shogun didn't beat him because they were the better fighters. They beat him because he got tired and couldn't compete with him anymore. So with him only being 31 years old, there is a chance that he could improve his cardio. You know, he's only had 13 fights at the end of the day. He's very early in his career and very young for the division. You know, light heavyweight, 31 years old, is an absolute baby for a light heavyweight. So those are some reasons why I'm not in love with the bet on Turkalj. But I am very, very tempted to bet him. And yeah, I will obviously let you guys know in the Discord if I do end up pulling the trigger on him. But at the moment, it's a pass from me, just because I don't like the idea of betting on, you know, foreign fighters against Australians in Australia, knowing the foreign fighters only win, you know, around, what, 35% of the time when fighting Australians in Australia. That's a strong trend to fight against. And, you know, Turkalj's got his weaknesses. There are things Pedro can do to cause him problems. But if you really, really want to bet this fight, I do think it's Turkalj or pass. I certainly wouldn't be betting Tyson Pedro this weekend based on his performance against Bukauskas. So if we look at the over-under on this one, we can see that fight doesn't go to a decision is at pretty steep favourite odds. I would agree with that. Definitely wouldn't be betting the over on this, because the way I look at it is Turkalj's very bad defensively, both standing up and on the ground. So there's a good chance Pedro could knock him out on the feet or submit him on the ground. And if Pedro doesn't get a finish, with how much Pedro slows down in fights, it could get to the point like the Shogun matchup, where he's too tired to defend himself and Turkalj gets a stoppage late on. So I do think it's quite likely this fight ends inside the distance. Unfortunately, that's reflected in the odds. And so, yeah, it's one of those fights where there's not really much value in playing the fight not to go to decision. Over 1.5 rounds is tempting, but then again, Turkalj very, very bad defensively on the feet. In terms of the prop bets on this one, I would be looking at Turkalj by decision. It's not something I'm going to be betting myself. I don't like props, but if you're the type of person that wants to sprinkle a little bit of money on every fight on this card to make watching them more interesting, Turkalj by decision at 5.20 plus 420, that's not bad to me. Yeah, you could do a lot worse than that. I don't think that's a bad prop. So I hope you found that useful. So now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is going to be Austin Lane versus Justin Tafa. So if you start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Tafa is a pretty big favourite at average odds of about 1.47, which is minus 213 for an implied probability of 68%. If we take a look at the odds on Lane, he's around an average of 2.85, which is going to be plus 185 for an implied probability of 35%. So in terms of X factors on this one, there are a couple for us to talk about. Lane is 35 years old, 6'6" with an 80-inch reach, and Tafa, 29 years old, 6 foot tall with a 74-inch reach. So age isn't really that big of a talking point on this fight. Tafa at 29 years old is very young for a heavyweight, so he should be making big improvements from fight to fight. When you look at Lane, 35 years old, he's kind of in his prime for a heavyweight, but nothing too major with these two in terms of age. Now, we know Justin Tafa has got home advantage on his side. I can't imagine this fight would go to a decision, but he's certainly going to have the crowd behind him, which can only be a good thing. And as we know, Aussie fighters win around 65% of the time when they face non-Aussies in Australia, so that's not good news for Austin Lane. The other X factor that we need to talk about is the size difference between these two. On paper, it looks like there should be a massive size difference between these two, because Lane is 6'6" with an 80-inch reach. Tafa is only 6 foot tall with a 74-inch reach, which means not only is Lane a lot taller, but he's got a 6-inch reach advantage. And having a 6-inch reach advantage statistically gives you around about a 65% chance of winning, which is ironic because that's about the statistical edge that Tafa being Australian in Australia against the non-Australian gives him. So Lane with a big size, big reach advantage on paper, but as we saw in the Benoit Saint-Denis versus Thiago Moises fight last weekend, you never really know what a size difference is going to look like until you see both guys face to face. Because when you look at the tail of the tape between Moises and Benoit Saint-Denis, it's not that big of a size difference. But then when you look at them at the ceremonial weigh-ins last week and actually in the fight, you could see that Benoit Saint-Denis was the bigger, more physically imposing guy. So fortunately for us, this matchup has obviously been rescheduled. Lane, Tafa, for a while back. This is a rematch after the fight was stopped due to unfortunate circumstances. But the benefit of that means we've seen these guys face off before, so we'll know exactly what this size difference is going to be like Saturday night. So as you can see here, Tafa is in flip-flops and Lane is in these shoes. So flip-flops got a slightly smaller sole, so it will that will play a factor, but not a massive factor. And as you can see, big size advantage here for Austin Lane. He looks a couple of weight classes bigger than Tafa. Now we know Tafa is a heavy guy that hits very hard. In actual fact, he's even missed weight before, which is not something that happens that often in the heavyweight division. So in terms of weight, he's a big boy. He hits very hard. But we know wingspan, length, reach, very important in MMA. And that is an area where Austin Lane will have a pretty big advantage. So that does make the fight more difficult for Tafa because, both these guys are primarily strikers. They both like to stand and bang. And that size difference means that Tafa has to cover so much more distance to get inside and land, which is a big issue for someone like Tafa that has a predominantly boxing-based style of fighting. It'll be far easier for Lane to chip away at Tafa and land from a range where Tafa can't counter him unless he comes forward, puts himself in some danger to close the distance. So on the feet, it's an interesting fight because Lane's bad defensively. He's sloppy. He's not that technical of a striker at all. He's also nowhere near as dangerous as Tafa, but the size difference could really close that skill gap. Now, one area in which Lane maybe does have a bit of an advantage over Tafa is his output on the feet. He's not as technical as Tafa. He doesn't hit as hard as Tafa. But Tafa is one of these guys that is very much a sniper. Throws a low volume of strikes and he just looks to load up and catch you with that one big right hand that you don't see coming. And so Tafa puts himself in a position where, like Chael Sonnen once said, when you try and win a fight by knockout, you often end up losing a decision because in the process of looking for that perfect shot that you're going to land to knock your opponent out, you're allowing your opponent to score volume strikes and outwork you. And Tafa could fall victim to that here because if he doesn't knock Austin Lane out, there's a pretty good chance that he will get outpointed. Lane's not as dangerous as Tafa on the feet, but that size difference, the length, the reach of Lane could make it a lot harder for Tafa to get inside and land his big knockout shots, his fight-ending shots. Now, don't get me wrong, Tafa's got home advantage on his side. It won't be easy for Lane to win a decision in Australia against an Aussie, but it is something to think about. So Tafa a lot more dangerous on the feet, a lot more powerful, but Lane could outwork him and out-hustle him. Now, when it comes to grappling, both these guys are very, very bad on the ground. So, whoever ends up on the bottom is in a lot of trouble, because both guys with their size are going to be heavy from top position, and with how bad both guys are on the bottom, they're just not going to be able to defend themselves. So both guys very low level on the ground. They are primarily strikers, but again, now that we've seen the size difference at those ceremonial weigh-ins, we saw how big of an impact size had on the Benoit Saint-Denis-Thiago Moises fight last weekend, where Saint-Denis was kind of able to just big brother and manhandle Moises on the ground. Both these guys go to the ground, with Tafa already having a pretty low-level ground game. You could see Lane having a lot of success on the ground as well, with his size advantage. So, very difficult fight for betting this. It's not the kind of fight that I like to bet on, because both guys have got big weaknesses. They're both dangerous on the feet. They both hit hard. Either one of these guys could get knocked out. On top of that, it's difficult to bet Lane because he's sloppy, bad defensively on the feet. Tafa's got home advantage on his side. Tafa hits very hard. On the flip side, it's tough to bet Tafa because he's a big favourite and doesn't throw a particularly high volume. Both guys are very low level on the ground, so it's difficult to trust either one of them because of that. And this is just not the kind of fight that I like to bet. It's an absolute minefield, and I would steer clear of this one. If you really, really, really have to bet it, if you really just want to sprinkle a little bit of money on this fight to make watching more interesting, I do think it's a dog or pass fight. I do think it's Austin Lane or pass, simply because of the odds. I think with the size difference in this one, with Tafa's low output, with how bad he is on the ground, I think you'd be crazy to bet him as a big favourite, even with the home advantage on his side. I'm certainly not going to be betting Austin Lane, but I do think he gives you the better risk to reward ratio out of the two. In terms of the over-under, obviously very unlikely this fight is going to go to a decision. Both guys very bad, very bad in different areas, bad defensively in different areas. Lane very sloppy on the feet. Tafa hits very hard. Pretty good chance this one ends inside the distance. Unfortunately, the odds reflect that, with it being in the steep favourite odds range. So, if I were to bet the over-under on this one, I might actually consider the over 1.5 rounds at decent underdog odds, just because sometimes when you get guys like these two that know that the other's very dangerous, very capable of knocking the other out, sometimes you get like a tentative, passive, cagey fight where they both show each other a lot of respect, start slow, and not a lot happens. The best example probably being when Derek Lewis fought Francis Ngannou. Now, that's not that likely, because if you look at some of Tafa's recent fights, he has come out extremely aggressive in his fights against Parker Porter and Harry Hunsucker. So it's very, very risky to bet the over on this fight. But again, just like with the money line odds on this, the over is going to give you the better risk to reward ratio, because the odds are so steep on finishes inside the distance. So it's more likely the fight will end inside the distance, but it's one of those things where you're not getting a particularly good risk to reward ratio. In terms of the props on this one, what are the odds on Lane inside the distance? Well, not great. Has Lane got any wins by submission? I doubt it, because he's very bad on the ground. He does have one rear naked choke there. Stoppage due to strikes. I'm just thinking, what are the odds on Lane by knockout or TKO? They're not great. I was thinking about Lane by knockout or TKO, because say for example he did get Tafa down and get into top position and get a stoppage through ground and pound, that would count as a win for Lane by knockout or TKO, but the odds aren't great. So you know what, the props are a bit dead on this fight. I would give them a miss. There's nothing I really like. So we'll move on, and I hope you found that useful. Now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is going to be David Dvorak versus Manel Kape. I'm just joking. Obviously, that fight has already happened. We're breaking down Felipe dos Santos against Manel Kape, and we will start off by taking a look at the odds on this one. So we can see that, where's Kape's odds? They've split it up into a different box for some reason. Let's do Control F. Where is he? Oh no, it's right in front of me. There we go. So Manel Kape, one of the biggest favourites on the card. The average odds are around 1.24, which is going to be minus 417 for an implied probability of 81%. If we take a look at the odds on Felipe dos Santos, he is around an average of, say, 4.0, which is going to be plus 300 for an implied probability of 25%. So Manel Kape, 29 years old, 5'5" with a 68-inch reach, and dos Santos, 22 years old, 5'7". We don't know what his reach is. So, you know, in terms of age, I think dos Santos is one of these guys that's probably coming into the UFC a little bit too young, probably a little bit too green. Could probably have done with another 2-3 years of improving on the regional circuit. 22 years old, very, very young to be making a UFC debut. But he is reasonably skilled, reasonably well-rounded, so he may have some success. You know, because he can kind of hold his own everywhere, but obviously it's tough to make your debut as a 22-year-old in the UFC. Because at 22 years old, there's going to be things you need to work on. You know, you're not that experienced. You're going to be green in some areas. You're going to have some holes in your game. Manel Kape at 29 years old, in his prime, should be making big improvements from fight to fight. In terms of size difference, we don't really know without that reach for dos Santos. So in terms of how these two match up from a stylistic point of view, it's a very interesting matchup. When it comes to striking, there's no doubt that Manel Kape has a big advantage over dos Santos. I like the way Kape moves. There's a lot of fluidity to everything he does. He's got good footwork, good movement. He's very technical. He hits very hard. He throws a diverse range of strikes. Dos Santos is a lot more scrappy on the feet. Not a bad striker by any means, but certainly not as technical as Kape. Doesn't move as well. Not as good defensively. Doesn't hit as hard either. My one criticism of Manel Kape's striking is that he is very passive. You know, there are certain times in his fights where he doesn't do a whole lot, and, you know, 2-3 minutes will pass where he's barely landed a strike. Obviously, this is because he's making a conscious effort to pace himself, but this inactivity also leads to some of Kape's fights being way closer than they need to be, where if he would have just shown a little bit more urgency to put his stamp on rounds, you know, a win would have been more decisive, shall we say. But there's no doubt about it, on the feet, Kape has a huge advantage. But when it comes to grappling, things get a lot more interesting, because dos Santos is a well-rounded fighter that does look to mix things up. He is primarily a striker, but he will shoot takedowns from time to time. And Manel Kape's takedown defense is extremely bad, and he's also very, very weak off his back. So I just want to show you some clips of these two guys so you can kind of see it for yourself. We won't spend too long on this, but once you see it with your own eyes, you'll see what I'm talking about. So this is Kape's last fight against David Dvorak, and we will see pretty early on into the matchup in this first round, Dvorak hits a rather easy takedown. You can see he shoots in on a double leg here, and Kape goes down very easily. Now, I know Kape was throwing a kick at the time, so kind of got caught off balance. But what's very notable to me in all of Kape's fights where he gets taken down is how weak he looks off his back. So you can see Dvorak in side control here, and Kape has been taken down. What you want to be seeing when a fighter first gets taken down is Kape immediately trying to be turning into Dvorak to try and get to his knees and pop back up to his feet. Instead, he kind of just lies on his back and allows Dvorak to have a little bit of top control here from side control. We'll skip through. Eventually, Dvorak decides he'd prefer to be in Kape's guard. And again, Kape just looks very, very weak off his back, goes to this closed guard position. So we'll keep skipping through. You know, Kape's been on the ground for about 30 seconds now. Dvorak starts to posture up and throw ground and pound. And again, even though there's a lot of space in there for Kape to try and get to his knees and pop back up, doesn't make much of an effort to. And Dvorak is able to stay heavy and tight from top position. So we keep skipping, And Kape's been on the ground for about a minute now, hasn't really made any effort to get back up to his feet using conventional methods we know work well, to him to try to turn into your opponent and get to your knees to stand back up. And again, he just starts fishing for a Kimura, which is a really, really low probability strategy for getting back up to your feet. It's very rare that you'll see someone able to create a scramble that enables them to get back up to their feet off the back of a Kimura off their back, because off your back it's very difficult to generate enough leverage to reverse your opponent. On this occasion, Kape manages to pull it off, but generally speaking, this is not an effective strategy for getting back up to your feet, and it kind of, for me, just highlights how bad Kape is off his back. It works out for him here, but 9 times out of 10, it probably wouldn't, and this position probably says more about Dvorak. Dvorak's inability to stay heavy and tight from top position than Kape's ability to be effective off his back, so that wasn't good. But we don't just want to use one example, we want to use multiple examples. And so if we go a little bit further back in Kape's UFC career to his fight against Matheus Nicolai, we can see a similar story of Kape looking pretty weak off his back, pretty easy to take down as well. Now, there's not tons of grappling in this fight, but there's enough for us to kind of see that Kape's grappling is a bit of an issue. So if we keep scrolling and look for that takedown, here we go. So you can see Matheus Nicolai shoots a double leg here, very nicely timed double leg, and Kape does a good job of getting his back over to the cage, but Nicolai just drives through on the takedown, and off this body lock hits an outside trip. Similar position to Dvorak, actually finds himself in side control. He's then just gone to half guard. So 3 minutes left to go in the round, and as you can see again, Kape recovers full guard, but just looks very, very weak off his back, with Matheus Nicolai able to hold him down relatively easily before choosing to jump on that guillotine. So we'll scroll through, and again Kape gives up an easy takedown here, this time off a single leg. Nicolai upsets his balance easily off that single leg. Again, Kape just goes to full guard, and Nicolai able to just hold him down from top position for the rest of the round, gets about a minute and a half top control. So you know what, I don't think we need to really go any further. Kind of made my point. Kape's takedown offense very bad, very weak off his back, but how much of an issue will it be in this fight, right? How likely is it that Felipe dos Santos will grapple? Well, like I said earlier in the breakdown, he is predominantly a striker, but he will also mix things up and go to his wrestling. So in this fight here, which was his last fight against Mr. Hugo Paiva, he does shoot the odd takedown. More on Strickland in just a little bit, getting ahead of ourselves. So if we skip through, and like I say, Dos Santos isn't a particularly good offensive wrestler, doesn't have particularly good grappling control, but you see it there, you know, where he kind of looks for a takedown, doesn't get it. He will look for a takedown, and we keep skipping through. You can see he gets one here. Nice deep double leg entry here from Dos Santos. Drives through, gets it as he drives the opponent into the cage. Very, very nice. Now his opponent's able to push down on the head, quickly scramble up to his feet, but that just kind of shows that Dos Santos will look to grapple. He goes to it again here. Another takedown, this time gets it. Again, doesn't have the best grappling control, but he will look for it, is the point that I'm trying to make. And the thing is, when your takedown defense is as bad as Kape's, when you're as weak off your back as Kape is, it's not that hard to get you down. And with how long he spends off, you know, just lying on his back, not doing a whole lot, you could see Dos Santos making this fight interesting, you know, with some takedowns and top control. Now, Dos Santos does slow down as fights wear on, so the longer the fight goes, the harder it'll be for him to get the takedowns. But for me, there are opportunities for Dos Santos to win this if he's got a reasonably good gas tank and comes in with a grappling heavy game plan. So from a betting point of view, what does all this mean? Well, I think based on the footage I've just shown you, most of you will probably agree to me that you would have to be, most of you would agree with me, I would guess, that you'd have to be an absolute crazy person to bet on Manel Kape as a big favourite. His odds carry an implied probability of 1.25, which is minus 400 for an implied probability of 80%, which means to get any value here, you'd have to give Kape a better than 80% chance of winning, which I don't think you can do with the footage that I've just shown you of both these guys. So there's no way, in my opinion, that you can bet on Manel Kape unless you are crazy. I just don't see how you can do it. In terms of a bet on Felipe dos Santos, obviously it's risky. We know if the fight stays standing, he's going to be in a lot of trouble. We know that Dos Santos slows down a lot as fights wear on. He's inexperienced. It's his UFC debut. Kape's a very good striker that hits very hard, and Kape's going to be making big improvements with his takedown offense and ground game. You know, it kind of cost him in the fight against Matheus Nicolai, right? He lost a split decision. Had he not given up such cheap takedowns, probably would have won that fight because he was out striking Nicolai. So Kape could show up with significantly better takedown offense, significantly better ground game than usual. And if he does, Dos Santos will obviously be in a lot of trouble. And from a betting point of view, with how these two match up stylistically, if you want to bet this fight, I do think it's dog or pass. You've got to let the odds do the work for you. Either you bet Dos Santos or you don't bet anything. There's no doubt that Dos Santos' odds give you the better risk to reward ratio in this one. Whether you want to bet on a young, inexperienced guy making his UFC debut against a tough, well-rounded, heavy-handed Manel Kape, I'm not so sure. It's not personally the type of bet that I would go for. You can see that we've performed extremely well on pre-fight bets this year. We've only had 2 losing months in the whole of 2023 when the profitability chart loads. And, you know, the way that we've been able to grind out profits almost every month in 2023 is by keeping things tight and looking for super strong positions where we can overwhelmingly stack the odds in our favour on fighters we've bet recently, like Yasmin Lasindu or Justin Gaethje or Benoit Saint-Denis last weekend. And sure, we'll lose a bet every once in a while. We bet on Taylor Santos and she lost, but as you can see from the profitability chart, we've only had 2 losing months in the whole of 2023, and the way we keep winning and grinding out these profits is by keeping it tight, overwhelmingly stacking the odds in our favour, and only pulling the trigger when we're betting on a guy with significant advantages over his opponent everywhere, which Dos Santos doesn't have. But if you're one of these guys that likes to take high-risk underdogs and dig for good value underdogs, Dos Santos could be your guy. Obviously do your own research, look into it, but as you can see from the footage I've shown you in this breakdown, Dos Santos is a live underdog here with his grappling and how easy it is to take Kape down and hold him down. So in terms of the over-under on this one, it's interesting. It is very interesting because I do think it's unlikely the fight would go to a decision, because Dos Santos does slow. So I think in the second half of the fight he would find it difficult to defend himself against Kape, who's quite dangerous on the feet. But at the same time, they make him tough in Shuto box, man. Shuto box fighters are well known for being tough, durable, very difficult to finish. You can't train at a gym like Shuto box unless you're an absolute warrior. So I actually do like the over 1.5 rounds on this fight. And I'll probably be betting that myself. I'll probably take a stab on the over 1.5 rounds, just because I think that it's unlikely Dos Santos finishes Kape, because he's not that dangerous standing up or on the ground. He's more of a volume striker. And if Kape were to finish Dos Santos, he would probably come in the second half of the fight when Dos Santos starts to slow. So I do quite like the over 1.5 rounds on this fight, and I'll probably be betting that myself. Obviously, if you're in the Discord, I will post the bet in there if I end up placing it. And in terms of prop bets, I would actually go for Kape by decision. I'm quite surprised the odds are that good. Usually when we see a guy that is a huge favourite in a lighter weight class like the flyweight division, you'd see Kape to win by decision at like 2.0, 3.0. With how tough and durable Dos Santos is likely to be with him being a Shuto box guy, and the fact that Kape is quite passive, tentative at times, has long periods of inactivity, I think there's a pretty good chance this fight will go to decision, which is like why I like the over 1.5 rounds. And Kape by decision is not bad. The odds are around 4.0 plus 300. I'm not going to bet it myself, but if you're the kind of guy that wants to sprinkle a little bit of money on every fight to make watching more interesting, Kape by decision isn't bad. So I would sprinkle on that, and I hope you found it useful. Now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is going to be Alexander Volkov against Tai Bam Bam Tuivasa. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Volkov is a massive favourite at average odds of around 1.40, which is going to be minus 250 for an implied probability of 71%. If we take a look at the odds on Tuivasa, he is around an average of 3.0, which is going to be plus 200 for an implied probability of 33%. So Volkov, 34 years old, 6'7" with an 80-inch reach, and Tai Tuivasa, 30 years old, 6'2", with a 75-inch reach. So we can see both guys roughly the same age, not a massive age difference between these two. But of course, Volkov has a lot more miles on the clock with 46 pro fights. And what's also interesting about Volkov is that he has been consistently competing against the best heavyweights in the world from a very early stage in his career. You can see that he made his debut in M1, which back in 2009 was one of the best MMA promotions in the world. I know that M1 has kind of fallen off now, but back in 2009 it was like a KSW level promotion. M1 was a pretty big deal. And then in his early 20s, he started fighting in Bellator and was pretty much in the Bellator title picture for the majority of his career. Obviously, Bellator's had some decent heavyweights over the years. So Volkov's been in a lot of wars. He's taken a lot of damage. He was knocked out, rocked, wobbled a lot of times early in his career. And so he's got a lot of miles on the clock. And when we talk about mileage, we think about cars, right? Cars are a really good analogy where if you've got a 10-year-old car and, it's only got 2,000 miles on the clock, compared to a 1-year-old car that's got 200,000 miles on the clock, the 10-year-old car is probably going to be more reliable than the 1-year-old car, because the 10-year-old car that's only done 2,000 miles has had far less wear and tear on the engine and the components, so it'll be more reliable, it'll hold up better. You can look at MMA fighters in the exact same way. The more fights that a fighter's had, the more damage they've taken, the more miles on the clock, the earlier they're going to start to decline. And I do think we've started to see signs of decline in Volkov. He's not as sharp as he used to be. And it's no surprise that he's declining, at 34 years old. Even though 34 isn't old for an MMA fighter, having 46 pro fights is a lot of fights, especially when the majority of them have been against some of the best heavyweights in the world. So that's something to think about. Tuivasa, on the other hand, he's been in a lot of wars as well. He's taken a lot of damage as well, but he's had less than half the number of fights that Volkov has had, and he's younger as well. So Tuivasa, one of these guys that should be improving from fight to fight. We've also got to point out the size difference between these two. Volkov is going to be a bit taller than Tuivasa, and also have a 5-inch reach advantage, which statistically gives him around about a 60% chance of winning, but that's offset by the fact that Tuivasa has obviously got home advantage in this matchup. We don't need to go into all the reasons why that is beneficial for Tai. So in terms of how these two match up from a stylistic point of view, we know that both guys are primarily strikers. Volkov has got a base in kickboxing. He even wears the kickboxing ankle wraps in many of his fights. And Tuivasa has a style that is very much steeped in boxing. Now, if we quickly go over the grappling, because the grappling is going to be the easiest kind of aspect of this fight to cover, we know that Tai Tuivasa is an extremely low level on the ground. His takedown offense is very bad. He's super weak off his back. He just has absolutely no ground game at all. Now, Volkov's takedown offense is pretty bad as well. He's also weak off his back, but the difference is that Volkov is, a high-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. Very, very dangerous ground game. He knows what he's doing on the ground. So whereas Tuivasa is very green, like white belt, blue belt level ground game, we know that if the fight goes to the ground, Volkov's going to have a huge advantage and he can cause Tuivasa big problems. If Volkov were to come into this fight with a grappling heavy game plan, I think Tuivasa would be absolutely screwed, because Tuivasa just wouldn't be able to deal with Volkov on the ground. He'd get overwhelmed, put in a bad position like he did in the Junior dos Santos fight, and probably finished. Volkov's advantages on the ground are absolutely enormous, but all fights start on the feet, and both these guys are primarily strikers. So pretty good chance this matchup will be a stand-up fight. Even more so because even though Volkov has a big advantage on the ground, Volkov isn't someone that likes to grapple. Every single weekend in these breakdown videos, we talk about how certain fighters have paths to victory, and they may or may not choose to use them, right? We know some guys, they might have a huge advantage on the ground over their opponent, but they'll prefer to stand and bang for whatever reason. Maybe out of ego, maybe they're chasing the 50-grand bonus check, maybe they want to impress Dana, maybe they want to gain more fans. Whatever the reason it is, fighters are often reluctant to take fights to the ground, even if they have big advantages there. And Volkov isn't someone that grapples very often. Usually when Volkov's fights go to the ground is because guys have taken him down, guys like Tybura, guys like Curtis Blades. So if this fight stays standing, it's actually a very interesting matchup, You've obviously got two very different styles. Volkov is a guy that likes to use his length to chip away at you with, long punches, range-finding kicks. And Volkov also, to be fair, likes to take control of the centre of the octagon, put you on the outside, be the aggressor, walk you down, force you to fight in that uncomfortable range. And his size and his length makes it easier for him to do that, because in order to alleviate the pressure that he's putting on you from the centre of the octagon, you've usually got to cover a lot of distance to come forward and get inside and land. That's an interesting dynamic in this fight, because Tuivasa also likes to be the aggressor, and you can't have two aggressors. They're going to meet in the middle, and something's got to give. Out of the two, Tuivasa's obviously the more powerful. Volkov, more of a volume striker. Don't get me wrong, he's a big guy, he does hit hard, but there's no doubt that Tuivasa is the more powerful out of the two. But it will be, tricky for Tuivasa to get inside and land his power strikes, because Volkov has got a good chin, very durable. He uses his length really well. One area that Tuivasa can have a lot of success with on the feet, though, are his leg kicks. And even though Tuivasa has got a predominantly boxing-based style of striking, I think his leg kicks are his biggest and best weapon. He doesn't telegraph them. He's very difficult to read because of how quickly he throws them with no wind-up. But what I like about Tuivasa's leg kicks is that not only does he disguise them very well, but they land clean, hard, are very impactful, and do a lot of damage. And we know Volkov's one of these long, lean, skinny guys, and if you attack the legs of Volkov, you can really affect his mobility and do a lot of damage. It's not going to be easy to stop a guy like Volkov as tough as nails with leg kicks, but Tuivasa could seriously impair Volkov's ability to fight to his full potential by, affecting his mobility, attacking those legs. So this is a really interesting fight from a betting point of view, because Volkov is the big favourite in this fight. But there's actually a lot of ways that Tuivasa can cause him problems and win. Even with the home advantage. On the feet, we know that Tuivasa is very fast, hits very hard, and we know that Volkov's a little bit slow to react at times, so it's possible Tuivasa could catch him with a big shot in the feet and knock him out. We also know Tuivasa has got a great chin. He's very tough, right? And the longer that Tuivasa stays in the fight, the more chance there is that he lands a knockout shot, puts Volkov away. We also know that Tuivasa's leg kicks can make life a lot harder for Volkov on the feet. So Tuivasa has passed the victory in this matchup. From a betting point of view, it's very tricky though, because with Tuivasa as a 3.0 plus 200 underdog, he's a very risky bet, because we know that his ground game is so bad that if Volkov does get into trouble in this fight, say he gets hurt on the feet and decides to take the fight to the ground, Tuivasa's takedown offense is so bad that Volkov probably will be able to get to the body lock, drag Tuivasa to the ground where he has a pretty big advantage. And so it's very difficult to bet Tuivasa in this fight, because he has a huge weakness that his opponent is pretty well positioned to exploit. Now, when it comes to striking, it's also kind of difficult to bet on Volkov in this fight, right? Because even though he's got that path to victory when it comes to grappling, we know that he often doesn't choose to use it. We've seen Volkov face guys in the past that he's had an advantage over when it comes to grappling. He's chosen to stand and strike. And if this is a stand-up fight, I think it's way closer than the odds suggest. I think Tuivasa's got a great chance of winning. I'd have it probably, maybe even Tuivasa as a slight favourite if it were to stay standing, especially with him having home advantage on his side. So from a betting point of view, it's very difficult to bet. For me, I'm not interested in betting a fight like this, because both guys have got big weaknesses that the other is pretty well positioned to exploit, and those aren't the kind of bets that I want to be placing. I want to be placing the kind of bets where the odds are overwhelmingly stacked in our favour, and the fighter that we're betting, we're getting them at reasonably good odds, and they have advantages over their opponent pretty much everywhere, right? If you look at our recent bet on Yasmin Lasindu, she was better than Polyana Viana everywhere, and she showed that in the fight. And we were able to bet her at better odds than what we would be able to get on Volkov. So it doesn't make sense that Volkov is this big of a favourite when you can be patient, wait for bets on fighters like Yasmin Lasindu to come along, where you get better odds and there's less chance of them winning, because Viana didn't have any major advantages over Lasindu in that fight. So Volkov is not interesting to me at all. I think the odds are very bad on him. On the flip side, there's not much upside in betting Tuivasa in this matchup, simply because we know if he goes to the ground, he's absolutely screwed. So this fight is an easy pass for me. If you really want to bet it, if you really want to sprinkle a little bit of money on this fight to make watching more interesting, you've got to go with Mr. Tuivasa. As the underdog, he does give you the better risk-to-reward ratio. This is dog or pass, but you know, it's a very, very risky bet that is not the kind of bet that I like to place. Now, in terms of the over-under on this one, it's kind of tricky, right? Because, like I said, on one hand, both these guys are absolutely tough as nails. They've both got great chins. They've both got no quit in them, and it won't be easy to get either of them out of there. On the flip side, they also both like to be the aggressor. They both like to come forward, dictate the pace, and they don't like to take a backward step. And when you get two guys like that have got to meet in the middle and figure out who's going to be able to lead the dance, if both of them refuse to take a backward step, someone's going to get knocked out pretty quickly in this fight. And so, very split on the over-under, because both are tough, difficult to put away, but they're also very aggressive and they don't mind standing their ground and going to war and betting on their chin, their toughness against their opponent. And in that situation, something's got to give. So I don't really lean either way on the over-under. I don't have a strong opinion on it. In terms of the prop bets on this one, yeah, I don't like the props. The knockout or TKO props are quite steep in the odds. I think you'd be better off just betting Tuivasa money line if you really want to gamble on this one, but I'm not going to be. So I hope you found that breakdown useful. Now let's break down the main event on this card, which is going to be Israel, the last stylebender, Adesanya, who I absolutely love. I know Izzy cops a lot of hate online. I think he's brilliant. We made a lot of money betting Izzy over the years. In various fights, we bet him to beat Kelvin Gastelum. We bet him to beat Robert Whittaker. We bet him to beat Alex Pereira in one of his recent fights. Izzy has been a money train for us. So we like Izzy a lot. And he has a very, very favourable stylistic matchup for him this weekend. With him being one of the biggest favourites on the card, if not the biggest favourite on the card, as a 1.15 favourite against Sean Strickland, which is minus 667 for an implied probability of 87%. Strickland is the underdog at average odds of 5.70, which is going to be plus 470 for an implied probability of 18%. Izzy is 34 years old, 6'4", with an 80-inch reach. Strickland, 32 years old, 6'1", with a 76-inch reach. So nothing major in terms of size and reach. Obviously, Izzy a little bit taller, slightly longer reach. Nothing major though, but obviously having a little size and reach advantage doesn't hurt. Does give Izzy a little bit of a statistical edge in this one. Now, you guys don't really need me to break this down for you, right? Everyone knows what Sean Strickland's path to victory is. Even Sean Strickland and Izzy know what Strickland's path to victory is. The question is whether he will actually take it. We all know that both these guys are predominantly strikers. They both like to stand and bang. And if this fight stays standing, Strickland is probably going to be in a lot of trouble. Izzy is a significantly better striker, better footwork, better movement, better technique, significantly better defensively. Throws a more diverse range of strikes. He's more accurate, a higher volume of strikes. The whole 9 yards. If this fight stays standing, I think Izzy will turn Strickland into a human punching bag and completely outclass him. If you remember a few years back when Izzy fought Brad Tavares in the main event of a fight night card, you could see that Tavares just had absolutely nothing for him. He was outclassed, overwhelmed. And I think if this fight stays standing, it'll be even worse than the Brad Tavares fight, because the problem with Strickland is that he comes forward in straight lines, hands down low, chin up high and exposed, and just looks to pressure you. But he's quite slow to react. Doesn't really have too much power in his hands. He doesn't really have that one-shot KO power to catch Izzy with something big and knock him out, like we saw Alex Pereira do. We even saw Kelvin Gastelum drop Izzy. Strickland can't really do that, or he can, but it's very unlikely. And because Strickland, fights with his hands down low, doesn't move his head much, Izzy is just going to be able to circle on the outside, absorb that pressure like we've seen him do against, Paulo Costa, Alex Pereira, chip away at Strickland from the outside with his jabs, his leg kicks, and just outstrike Strickland by a wide margin. Strickland will take a huge amount of damage if this fight stays standing. But the reason why we all love MMA is because it's very difficult to be very good at everything, right? There are some unicorns like John Jones, George St. Pierre. Outside of that, most fighters in the sport have got weaknesses that can potentially be exploited, and that is the case with Israel Adesanya. We know that his takedown offense is pretty good, but if you can get him down, the Jan Blachowicz fight shows us that he's pretty weak off his back. Now, we know Blachowicz is a lot bigger, a lot more physically imposing than Sean Strickland is. However, Strickland's cardio is a lot better than Jan Blachowicz's is. So Strickland could potentially grapple earlier in the fight, harder in the fight than Blachowicz could. And we're referencing the Blachowicz fight, so we should probably just bring it up so you guys that may not remember it or may not have seen it before, if you're a new fan, can actually see it for yourself. So let's get this Blachowicz-Izzy fight up, and you can see exactly what I mean. Now, to be fair to Izzy, no one's really been able to cause Izzy a problem with grappling. And, in this fight, Blachowicz obviously did have a lot of success with grappling. He took Izzy down relatively easily, held Izzy down relatively easily, and after the fight, Izzy said, Jan was too big, too strong, couldn't get him off of me, my legs were tired. And obviously Strickland is smaller than Blachowicz, but like I say, Strickland's a better offensive wrestler, better grappling control, better ground game, and above all else, much better cardio than Blachowicz to grapple harder for longer. So with a guy like Izzy, we know that his initial takedown defense is very good, and we've seen this in tons of fights, right? The Marvin Vettori fight, the second one, probably a really good example of this. Izzy is so good at reading his opponent's body language and movement that when you first shoot a takedown on him, it's virtually impossible to hit that initial takedown, the takedown entry, because he sees you come in. He can get underhooks in play very early. His balance is very good. It's very difficult to upset his balance. The way you get Izzy down is by driving him into the cage and chain wrestling Khabib style, right? Go into the single leg, the double leg, the body lock, the inside trip, the outside trip. And you keep hustling with lots of different takedown attempts till you can eventually upset his balance. Very difficult to take Izzy down if you're just going to shoot single shot takedown entries, which typically speaking is more along the lines of what Sean Strickland does. So if he wants to beat Izzy this weekend, he's going to have to come in with persistent chain wrestling, which is something that he doesn't do very often. So we'll just take a look at some clips of Izzy's takedown defense in this fight. And obviously Blachowicz, in an effort to pace himself, doesn't start grappling until the second half of this fight. So we have to skip quite far in before we can see how Izzy looks off his back, all that kind of stuff. I think the grappling starts in round 3, so we're almost there. Here we go, here we go, here we go. So now we get a little chance to see Blachowicz's offensive wrestling as well as Izzy's takedown offense and ground game. So here comes the first double leg. Uses striking to open up Izzy's lower body, and Izzy goes down very, very easily. Starts to scramble back up to his feet, but Blachowicz attacks a rear naked choke. Izzy back up. But we keep going. Keep skipping through. Blachowicz, attempts various takedowns in this fight. And then we keep going. If we go into round 4, we'll see more of Izzy's takedown offense and ground game. Again, I'm just skipping through, so I don't want to make the breakdown any longer than it needs to be. Like you can see, Izzy's takedown offense isn't terrible. Like he does a reasonably good job of stuffing the majority of Blachowicz's takedown attempts. His problem is when Blachowicz does get the takedown, it's very easy to hold Izzy down. So here you can see a nice double leg entry from Blachowicz. Again, shoots after throwing that left hand, nice and deep on the legs and hips of Izzy, straight into Izzy's guard. So from here, there's 3 minutes left to go in the round. So Izzy's got a lot of time to work his way back up to his feet. But as you can see, Jan just goes with this half guard position and is able to hold Izzy down very easily. Similar to Manel Kape that we also studied on this card. Izzy just doesn't really make much of an effort to get back up to his feet. Looks very, very weak off his back. In actual fact, Jan hits the takedown with 3 minutes left to go in round 4 and manages to hold Izzy down for the remaining 3 minutes of that round, which isn't good. If we keep skipping through, not that long until we get another example of Izzy being very weak off his back. So here you can see, here's the double leg in round 5 from Jan. Again, almost the exact same point in the round, right? As we approach the midway point of the round, Izzy gives up the takedown very, very easily. And with 2.5 minutes left to go in the round, Jan easily holds him down. So the blueprint has been written on how to beat Izzy. Tire him out a little bit and then start aggressively pursuing the takedown. And if you can get him down, good chance you'll be able to rack up a lot of top control, causing big problems. Can Sean Strickland follow Blachowicz' blueprint and use the same game plan and strategy to defeat Israel the Last Stylebender, Adesanya, become the new middleweight champion, which would be a PR nightmare for the UFC, but I'd love to see it if I'm being honest. I'm here for it. Can Sean replicate Blachowicz's strategy? 100% yes. I think Strickland is a better MMA grappler than Jan Blachowicz. In fact, I'm 100% certain he's a better MMA grappler than Blachowicz. He may not have the size or the power of Blachowicz, but he has better takedown entries, better grappling control, and better cardio, which means he can grapple harder for longer. Jan had to wait until the 3rd round until he started to shoot takedowns because he knew he couldn't go too hard early in the fight, trying to take Izzy down, because then he may slow down in the second half of the fight and not be able to defend himself, which is kind of what we saw when Blachowicz fought Ankalaev. Strickland, if he chooses to, can go hard with the grappling from the 1st round to the 5th. We know his cardio is great. And if anything, if Strickland were to come in with a grappling heavy game plan, of course he's going to get tired, but Izzy's probably going to get a lot more tired, having to exert energy to defend the takedowns and carry Strickland's body weight. So Strickland has a clear and obvious path to victory here, and if he comes in with a grappling heavy game plan, he can beat Israel Adesanya easily. The problem is that Strickland has fought many guys who he has an advantage over on the ground, and for whatever reason he chooses not to grapple, and this has cost him multiple times. We know Alex Pereira's takedown offense ground game is not good, yet Strickland didn't shoot a single takedown in the first 2.5 minutes of the round and got knocked out. We also know Jared Cannonier, very bad takedown offense, low level on the ground. Strickland barely shot a takedown in this fight, which is concerning because obviously Strickland's path to victory against Cannonier is exactly the same as Strickland's path to victory against Israel Adesanya. So if he didn't shoot takedowns against Cannonier, we can't really trust him to shoot takedowns on Izzy either. But what's really funny about this fight is that everyone knows what Strickland's path to victory is, and everyone's very open about it. Strickland and Izzy openly talk about grappling being Izzy's Achilles heel and Strickland's path to victory, the extent where MMA journalists are even asking Strickland about whether he's going to grapple or not in this fight. So to give us some idea of the probability that Strickland will grapple this weekend, let's hear it straight from the horse's mouth. Let's hear what Strickland says.
Continue.
How are you feeling about this Israel Adesanya matchup? On paper, most people would say, "Oh, you need to go in there and grapple this guy to win." But we saw them say that about the Alex Pereira fight, and you didn't do that. So, what are you thinking about your game plan ahead of Sunday?
I mean, here's the thing, guys. I've been wrestling my ass off. But I also wrestled my ass off with Alex. Problem is, man, you get in there and your dick gets a little bit hard. Next thing you know, you're going to turn into a boxing match. So, maybe I'm going to try to be a complete MMA fighter, but no promises. No promises.
Did you learn anything from Alex when you sparred with him that can help you in this fight, or was it kind of you were there to help him? So that
was the first that Strickland spoke about grappling, and then a little bit later on in this Fight Week interview, talks about it a little bit more.
Game and read his cues.
I mean, here's the thing about Izzy, man, the China man. If we could start calling him the China man, or the China whore, Chinese whore would be nicer. You fight a guy like that, dude, fucking little twinkle toes, running around, dance around, it's hard to shoot. You know, you're going to have to go nose to nose, dick to dick, and make it a war.
How do you start doing that against a guy who is moving like him, though? Do you just have to
cut off the ring, you know, fucking take some jabs, take some punches, get some blood, give a little bit to the gods.
Okay. Last one, I mean, you're summing up everything beautifully, but last one for me, how are you finding being in Australia? And do you...
So, what's super interesting about that interview with Sean Strickland is not only does he agree with the journalist and identify that his path to victory this weekend is grappling, but he also describes what he needs to do to get the takedown, where he's talking about having to pressure Izzy, take some shots to get inside and grab a hold of him, and he talks about how that's going to be difficult to do because of how good the footwork and the movement of Izzy is. So you can tell that even though Strickland never grapples, he's very aware of his path to victory in this fight. Could this be that one time the Strickland actually fights smart and does what he needs to do in order to win? You know, earlier in that clip that I just played you, Strickland said that his plan was to grapple against Alex Pereira, but he gets in there, he starts exchanging, and then he just wants to fight because he loves fighting. This is obviously a massive opportunity for Sean Strickland. He's very open about the fact that he's motivated by money. You get paid a lot more as a champion, and he's in a title fight. Everyone knows that if he grapples hard, Izzy is in a lot of trouble. Everyone knows Strickland never grapples, but everyone knows Strickland can grapple. With this being the biggest opportunity of Strickland's life, is this the one time where he's going to forget about going to war, forget about putting on an entertaining fight, forget about scrapping, forget about making people bleed and hurting people, and just go out, stick to a game plan and strategy which gives himself the best chance of winning? Is this the first time Strickland's going to do that? Because if it is, I think Izzy's in a lot of trouble. So from a betting point of view, this is a real interesting fight, because we know that if Strickland fights like he usually does, he's going to get absolutely smoked. Strickland has virtually zero chance of winning this fight on the feet. Unless Izzy gets injured or disqualified, it's not happening, because he's not going to be able to outstrike Izzy. He's not going to be able to inflict more damage than Izzy. And very unlikely he will be able to knock Izzy out, because Izzy's got a decent chin, very good defensively. Strickland's a volume striker, doesn't have power in his hands. It can happen, it's very unlikely. But you can't bet Izzy in this fight, because we know, based on the Blachowicz fight, that if Strickland comes in with a grappling heavy game plan, Izzy's in a lot of trouble. So Izzy's odds are completely unplayable. You can't bet him. On the flip side, how many more bullets can you fire on Strickland? How many times can you bet this guy when he's facing someone that is an easy stylistic matchup for them? When you know if he just grapples, it's an easy night's work. How many bullets can you fire on this guy where you bet him to go out and grapple and he just doesn't do it? You bet him to go out with a grappling heavy game plan against Pereira. He doesn't, it gets knocked out. You bet him to go out with a grappling heavy game plan against Jared Cannonier. He doesn't, lose a close split decision. How many more times can you trust this guy with your money? Is it third time lucky? If you bet him this weekend, will he finally come through for you and win all that money back that you lost backing him previously to use grappling heavy game plans? Who knows? But Strickland's a very tough guy to trust with your money, because like he said straight from the horse's mouth, he has a game plan and strategy, but you know what Mike Tyson said, everyone's got a game plan till you get punched in the face. So Strickland's one of these guys where the game plan strategy seems to go out the window as soon as he gets in the octagon. So with the way the odds are on this fight, it's obvious that this is a dog or pass fight, right? You'd have to be crazy to bet Izzy in this odds range with how good Strickland is, and with the fact that Izzy's very bad on the ground and Strickland can make him pay for those weaknesses. But is Strickland worth a bet? Who knows? I mean, he probably is, right? There probably is good value on him in this odds range. The odds are very, very wide. Like I say, we've made a profit. Don't want to keep banging on about this in every video, but we perform extremely well on pre-fight betting this year. We've only had 2 losing months in the whole of 2023. And the reason why we've been able to consistently grind out these profits in 2023 is by sticking to our strategy of only betting on fighters when we overwhelmingly stack the odds in our favour. And we will take an L every once in a while, like we did with Taylor Santos recently. But we'll win far more bets in situations where the fighter we bet has advantages over their opponent virtually everywhere. The Benoit Saint-Denis, the Justin Gaethjes, the Yasmin Lasindus, which are the winners that we've hit, you know, over the last sort of month to 2 months. And so this is one of those fights where, as much as Strickland is very tempting, I also know that if I bet him, I'm putting my money in a lot of danger. I would much prefer to stay patient in September, wait for another Benoit Saint-Denis or a Yasmin Lasindu to come along, and then we can keep this nice uptrend going and keep this nice profitability chart looking good. So that's what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be keeping it tight. I'm not going to bet on Strickland this weekend, but I don't think he's a bad bet. And if you are someone that likes the value bet and, you know, dig for really good value underdogs, I mean, Strickland is a really good value underdog. There's no way to dress it up. I'm just sick of researching this guy's fights, identifying that he can win easily if he grapples, and then literally watching him go out and try and win a kickboxing match against a better kickboxer. It's just lunacy. And you know what they say, you know, repeatedly doing the same thing and expecting different results is the definition of madness. So I'm done with trusting Sean Strickland to grapple. Now, in terms of the over-under on this one, I do very much lean to the fight going the distance. Both guys very tough, very good defensively. Neither of them are particularly easy to put away. And so if there is a finish in this fight, it's probably going to be Izzy just kind of stopping Strickland by racking up a lot of damage and getting to the point where Strickland can't defend himself. We know it won't be easy to knock Strickland out. It won't be easy to make Strickland quit. But sometimes when the skill gap is too big, you know, Strickland might get overwhelmed on the feet and the ref might step in and stop it. But I do think it's more likely this fight goes to a decision. Both guys are tough. Both, you know, not going to be easy to get out of there. And to be fair, neither guy's like super dangerous on the feet either. Both Izzy and Strickland are volume strikers. You know, when Izzy gets finishes, it tends to be, you know, breaking you down with volume first, inflicting a lot of damage, and then putting you away. Of course, he's had the odd flash knockout like the Pereira, the Whittaker fight. But for the most part, Izzy's more of a volume striker, and we know Strickland can take a shot. In terms of the props on this one, I would go Strickland by decision. I am actually quite surprised the odds are that good. I'm not going to bet it myself. I don't like props, but if you're the kind of guy that wants to sprinkle a little bit of money on every fight to make watching more interesting, Strickland by decision, 12.0 plus 1,100. Quite like that. That's not a bad prop to me. So I hope you found that breakdown useful. If you did, please hit the like button below. It helps boost how many people see this video like you wouldn't believe. Like, the more likes I get on videos, like way more people get to see them. So if you appreciate this content, helps me out a lot when you hit the like button. I really appreciate it. Also, subscribe if you haven't already, and let me know what your bets are for this weekend by leaving a comment below. Check out my website, MMABettingTips.com. Link for that in the description below for live betting group, pre-fight bets, breakdown videos for all the prelim fights on every card. There's tons over there I think you'll get a lot of value out of. But for now, take care everyone, and I'll be back very soon with another breakdown video for that Shevchenko Grasso card next week. Nice one, guys. Take care. Bye.